I can't lie, Bungie absolutely cooked with this new Hunter exotic. It is so much fun to use, and with Prismatic it has some addicting gameplay loops for me, with just constant ability spam and some crazy fast supers and transcendence, plus it helps me get away from the ugly fashion of using the exotic class item, which is kinda nice. Now before we get into the build, if you guys do enjoy the content, a like and sub would be greatly appreciated, and hey, come stop by my Twitch on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays around 1 p.m.-ish to talk builds, maybe run some endgame content, or to just come chill if you'd like. I'd really appreciate it, thank you. So today's build focuses solely around the brand new Hunter exotic helmet, Mask of Fealty. Its exotic perk is Null Factor, where Withering Blade hits and bounces create a small stasis crystal and refund a portion of melee energy. Using a Withering Blade to shatter crystals or frozen targets releases a spread of Withering Blades. Now, I first do want to say that the Withering Blade spread is currently bugged against frozen enemies specifically, but still works almost always on crystals. So when you throw your shuriken at a crystal, it will basically explode and spread a few smaller ones, and you can then spread more from that, kind of just like almost an infinite spam of just crystals everywhere. While this is really cool and within the stasis subclass can allow for some fun ability spam, we are actually going to use it, I guess how it's not intended, now within the Prismatic subclass. We are going to instead use them how you would just regularly use a Withering Blade by just chucking them out at enemies, but since they are now enhanced, they will actually have the ability to freeze multiple enemies instead of just slowing from one, allowing you to shatter whole groups instantly and even stun unstops in just one shuriken, which is pretty damn good. Plus, thanks to some fragments and artifact mods, we will be able to add in some really good survivability to this build. Now for the build itself, we're going to be using Deadfall Tether as our super for a 30% debuff to enemies, and since it's one of, if not the best crowd control supers in the entire game, also when we kill multiple enemies affected by our tether, we can actually grant ourselves Devour, thanks to the new artifact mod, Power from Pain, where killing 3 weakened enemies rapidly will grant you Devour. Now onto the abilities, we'll be using Gambler's Dodge, Withering Blades of course, and a Magnet Grenade to use alongside Facet of Dominance to apply weaken to enemies affected by it, giving us another easy way to get Devour thanks to that artifact mod. The aspects used in this build will be Winter's Shroud, so on slowing targets we gain some massive class ability regen, helping fund into way more melee spam, and the other one will be Stylus Executioner, to go invis after killing enemies affected by any debuff, which will pretty much be always with this build. Now this one I toyed around with a bunch of different options and was kind of stuck between just Stylus Executioner and Gunpowder Gamble as in what synergized best with this build, and while GPG is definitely the most fun option, it not being able to work in Transcendence was a huge turnoff for me, and the focus of this build for me being on just getting to Transcendence as fast as possible so I can spam as many of these shurikens as I can, made it just kind of useless most of the time. Now the fragments for the build are going to be Facet of Ruin to increase the damage and radius of shattering crystals or frozen targets, Facet of Dawn, which grants us Radiant on melee hits for a 25% damage buff and anti-barrier to our weapons, and thanks to all the melee spam with this will pretty much always be up for you. Facet of Devotion, so defeating enemies affected by stasis debuffs will give us extra light Transcendence energy, and you know, that nice plus 10 strength is always good. Facet of Protection for extra damage resist near enemies, and of course that extra plus 10 strength is really nice as well. Then lastly we'll have Facet of Dominance, so our Magnet Grenades can weaken enemies. This one can be swapped out for something like Facet of Purpose to grant yourself Overshield. Instead, since we can't really use our Magnet Grenade in Transcendence, but I still do like using it as an easy way to weaken enemies for quick Devour, especially if I don't have Tether up or I don't want to use it on maybe just like 3 or 4 enemies. Now for the armor mods, we're going to be using Double Dynamo on the helmet for chunks to super on dodges, since our melees themselves won't really be killing enemies, so hands-on doesn't really work with the build, and then also a Kinetic Siphon. On the gloves, Focusing Strike for class ability energy when we use our melee, and then Momentum Transfer for melee energy when we use our grenade, and Impact Induction for vice versa. For the boots, Invigoration for melee energy on orb pickups, Recuperation for heals from orbs, and then also a Kinetic Surge. Lastly, for the class item, Bomber for some grenade energy when we dodge, Reaper to spawn in an orb on our next weapon kill after dodging, and Powerful Attraction to suck in orbs when we dodge. Now the stat distribution you're going to want to go for is, I'd say 100 resilience first, 100 strength, and then the highest discipline you can get. But to be real, having just 100 Resil is way more than enough, and I'd say just get the highest of both strength and discipline you can get. Now for the artifact mods, we're going to be using Rapid Impacts for a stacking reload speed buff to our GLs, Fell the Revenant for increased weapon damage to Scorn, Total Carnage, so after finishers we can grant ourselves damage resist, Power from Pain to grant us Devour on defeating 3 weakened enemies quickly, Hail the Storm, so our crystals will spread slow and damage, and then also the tonic boost that will increase the damage of shattering a frozen enemy or a crystal. Short editing note here, I completely forgot about 2 mods that are also in this as well. We've got Killing Breeze, Rapid Weapon Final Blows grant you a bonus to mobility, and then also Concussive Reload, using a grenade launcher to damage a boss, damage a champion, or break a combatant shield weakens them, which is very useful since we're using 2 grenade launchers within this build. Now in the last column, we're going to be taking Brain Freeze, so frozen enemies can spread slow to others, and then Conductive Cosmic Crystal, so our Void Grenade and Tether can deal more damage to enemies affected by stasis, and the Tonic buff if you do want to use it, but I do think Hail the Storm is a little bit better, but still, dealing more damage to enemies affected by stasis is still pretty good. So this will take us to the last part of the build, the weapon setup. In the kinetic slot, I was testing out a bunch of different options, and really, you can run anything you want. It just depends on your playstyle. If you want some more slow and freeze, plus the ability to spawn in crystals and even some shards at times, then Wicked Implement is your go-to. If you want to spam crystals around like crazy to take advantage of the second part of Mask of Fealty's perk, then Verglass Curve is a great option. And if you want to just fully build into melee spam, then Monte Carlo will be the best support weapon you could really ask for. But after a lot of playing with this build, the weapon I'm actually leaning more towards is Kvastov. The reason why is the build's ability spam is already ridiculous itself, and I feel like I don't need a synergizing weapon that much, so a weapon that can deal some good AoE damage and also help me fill up Transcendence even faster I feel is far more helpful. Plus it having shoot to loot, is a nice little touch. Now in the energy slot, we're going to be taking the new Area Denial GL from Vesper's host, Velocity Baton, since it can help fill up our light Transcendence bar very quickly and can apply a debuff to bosses and champs thanks to Concussive Reload. Now the role you'd want on it is probably going to be Attrition Orbs and Demo to fully lean into more ability spam and making this weapon a very good support weapon. But I currently have Repulsor Brace and Destabilizing, which is really nice for spawning in some Void Overshields for yourself. Now in the heavy slot, you can really utilize anything you want, but I'm using the new seasonal GL Bittersweet with Envious Arsenal and Bait and Switch, since the thing this build currently lacks is damage, and this weapon definitely brings that. Also, if you do have the new Dungeon GL, that is a very good substitute, but I'm assuming most people probably don't have the God Roll yet. I am still farming for it, and good lord, it is brutal. This build so far for me has been the most fun to use in Onslaught outside of T-Crash Titan, since it just has an addicting gameplay loop for me and has insane crowd control. I really hope you guys like this build as much as I did, because I find it so much fun to play, and especially in the new Onslaught. Anyway, thank you guys so much for all the support in the last video. I really appreciate it after the long break I took from uploading. It definitely means a lot. Thank you guys so much. More videos to come soon, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.